The first video I uploaded to my channel featured the Radeon RX 460. This GPU embodies the theme of my channel as an ultra-budget component that can still provide a lot of value for the right user. The RX 460 is a low-tier card released by AMD way back in 2016. It was a godsend to many during the GPU shortage in recent years, capable of handling 1080p gaming in older AAA titles and most esports games with impressive frame rates. As I mentioned, this card was a significant reason why I started the channel, and remains one of my favorite budget components in the collection. Today, I wanted to revisit the card since my initial review was brief and not as comprehensive as I would have liked. My goal is to see how the RX 460 performs in a variety of games, ranging from older and less demanding titles to newer and more resource-intensive ones. Obviously, this is a pretty low-end GPU that is about 7 years old now. My channel's primary focus is on affordable components and what they can be used for. I've received numerous comments from viewers who are confused that I don't test higher-end components in the newest games at a 2K or 4K resolution. If you're interested in that type of content, there are plenty of other channels and videos on YouTube to watch. My channel's focus is pretty evident from its name. Anyways, the RX 460 was released in 2016. It's built on the GCN 4.0 architecture with a 14nm process size. My RX 460 is the very common HP OEM variant with just 2GB of GDDR5 video memory on a 128-bit bus width and a memory clock of 1750 MHz. There were also 4GB models released, though they are a bit more uncommon. The core is clocked at 10,090 MHz and boosts up to 1200 MHz. For rendering, the 460 has 896 shading units, 56 TMUs, and 16 ROPs. It's also very power efficient with a TDP of just 75 watts, meaning it does well with a low wattage power supply. In terms of pricing, the RX 460 had an MSRP of just $86 at release. Right now, the 2GB HP RX 460 can be picked up used on eBay for around $35 to $40, and you can find the 4GB models for around $10 to $20 more. I intend to test the RX 460 in a number of titles and really push it while understanding its limitations. While it isn't a powerhouse in terms of its actual render configurations or frequencies, I know one of the biggest limiting factors will be the 2GB of VRAM that I have on board. For testing, I'll be using my new GPU test bench. This new setup features the 6-core 12-threaded Ryzen 5 5600X on a B450 motherboard with 16GB of DDR4 RAM clocked at 3600 MHz. This upgrade was much needed, especially since the old i3-10105F test bench faced occasional CPU bottlenecks. My game testing lineup is still a bit thinner with modern titles than I'd like it to be, and I intend to purchase some new releases like Starfield, Forza Motorsport, and AC Mirage pretty soon. Until then, in the games I test today, my goal is to achieve playable results with the RX 460. This means that in games where a very high frame rate is best, like esports, settings and resolutions will be tweaked to aim for around 100 or more frames per second. In single-player titles, the goal is to achieve at least 30 to 40 frames per second while trying to maintain as much graphic fidelity as possible. In more intensive AAA games, this is probably a card that will need to be dropped down to 900 or 720p to offer a playable experience. Counter-Strike 2 was tested first. The settings I chose were pretty much the lowest across the board in a 1920 by 1080p resolution. In terms of performance, the RX 460 had no problems, averaging about 90 FPS during the bot match in Dust 2. While it wouldn't fully utilize a higher refresh rate display, this is still a great result for most users. Next, I tested GTA 5 at high settings, which are really the medium settings in the game. Personally, I can't tell a difference between high and very high settings in the game, and with an average around 55 FPS, the RX 460 provides a pretty good performance in this classic title. I was eager to test Fortnite with the new platform as it was the game that caused my old i3 to struggle the most. At 1080p in performance mode with epic view distance, low textures, and low meshes, the Ryzen 5 5600X never exceeded around 30% utilization. The RX 460 averaged a bit over 130 FPS during the match I played, which is pretty ideal for just a $35 card. A newer indie game that I included in my testing was Risk of Rain 2. This 2020 release was tested with a mix of mostly high and ultra settings with optional settings enabled. While settings could definitely be lowered for some more frames, averaging in the low 80s is still a great result at 1080p. Next, I benchmarked the 2017 release Assassin's Creed Origins. This was dropped to 720p as I knew the 1080p results would be rough. With the lowest graphics setting selected, the benchmark resulted in a fairly stable 53 FPS, and while the visuals may be pretty hard to look at, this is technically a playable result. Horizon Zero Dawn, also tested in 720p at the lowest settings, led to a worse result with an average of 40 FPS. I feel like this is one of those games that can look so good you at least need to play it at 1080p, but in reality, I'm sure some individuals can handle 720p low settings with this one. Forza Horizon 5 was next up, and I tested this one at a 1600 by 900p resolution, as it is a very well optimized title. Settings were set to the lowest before using the in-game benchmark to test. If it weren't for the low 43 FPS average, I would say that this game looks acceptable at this resolution. A drop to 720p would likely result in frame rates closer to the 60 FPS mark, which I think is the ideal minimum for a game like this. Next, I really pushed the RX 460 with Cyberpunk 2077, knowing that it would not yield a great result. With the in-game benchmark, I tested in 720p with the lowest settings. I was actually a bit surprised by the average of 50 FPS result, so I upped the resolution to 900p just to see if I could hit at least 30 frames. Again, surprisingly, at 900p, the RX 460 was hitting frame rates in the mid to upper 30s, which I suppose is playable for someone just desperate to play Cyberpunk with a low-end system. Finally, I put Hogwarts Legacy to the test at 720p with the lowest preset. When it came to outdoor visuals like grass, trees, and water, the RX 460 struggled, often dropping into the low 30s and even upper 20s at times. However, upon entering the castle, the frame rate shot up into the upper 40s and even into the 50s. This echoes the trend seen in other demanding modern AAA games I tested. While it might be playable for some, if your main focus is playing these kinds of titles, I would recommend looking for a GPU with a bit more power, even on a budget. In summary, the RX 460 still fulfills its role as a budget-friendly GPU for extremely casual gamers who are mainly interested in older games or esports titles that don't require top-notch graphics. However, the limited VRAM, at least on my card, is a significant limitation. I would suggest considering one of the 4GB models available on the market. But honestly, for the typical price of around $60, you might be better off investing the same amount in cards like the RX 470 or 570, which offer at least 4GB of VRAM. If you're patient, you might even come across something like an RX 580 or GTX 1060 for a similar cost. In any case, I hope you found this review of the RX 460 enjoyable and informative. If you appreciate this type of content and would like to see more, please consider subscribing if you haven't already. And as always, if you have any feedback, please do not hesitate to leave a comment. Thank you.